placed in solitary confinement, and some of these prisoners actually don't have disciplinary misconducts on their record. Isn't the system really the same thing as Pelican Bay, where those prisoners are held indefinitely in that system and they really have very little way to actually get back into general population? Some of those prisoners have been held there for 10, 15, 20 years. And is there federal money that's earmarked for these control units?
Okay. What the young lady is referring to is we have a security threat group management unit that was started in response to a significant increase in the amount of, we call them security threat groups or gangs in our facilities. It's not equivalent to Pelican Bay. It's actually significantly different in that it's a program-based intervention. That's 5 phases. Each phase is at minimum 90 days, and folks have the ability through participating in programming and then slowly being released with other individuals in that unit and showing that you can interact with others to work their way off the unit. Out of 51,000 inmates, we have about 46 individuals, and individuals were identified as the highest risk gang members in our system. So our numbers equating to California, the program is much smaller, and it's a program-based intervention, not a punitive base, you're locked up till whenever. It's specific steps, specific phases. We have a significant amount of counselors, and in cell and out of cell.
Can you talk about the specific steps and specific phases? What the prisoners have to do to get out? Do they have to debrief on other prisoners?
No. I mean, we certainly gather information on prisoners all the time from gang members, but that's not, you don't, some of the programs, and I think you're referring to a Jersey program where you had to refute your gang membership. That's not required till you get out. So it's different than that. But by the same token, you're not going to, you know, gang members cause a big interruption in our facility. And this is an intervention that we believe will make the rest of the facility safe. So assuming that we're selecting the right folks, which I'm confident we are, we also have due process to grieve it and all the way up to my office. So there's checks and balances in place. And they're aware of the phases, and they are given orientation when they get in the program.
I asked the prisoners who were in it, and they aren't aware of the phases, so maybe you can tell me so I can explain them to them.
Well, actually, I was there the 2nd of January and talked to every inmate on that place, and everybody was pretty familiar with it. So they may be telling you one thing and me another. Well, I'll certainly follow up afterwards. I'll take some other questions. You can have this thing, all the information everybody has on the program.
Okay.
All right? Yep.
Russell Maroon Shoats, he's a 70-year-old prisoner who was recently moved from SCI Green to SCI Mahanoy. He served 30 plus years in solitary confinement in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. He hasn't broken any prison rules or been issued any misconducts in more than 2 decades. Despite this, he continues to be held in a tiny, constantly illuminated cell for 23 to 24 hours a day, deprived of any social interaction or environmental stimulation, conditions that have widely been accepted as torture. So my question is, what justification do you and the OC have to continue holding Maroon in these torturous conditions?
Okay, thanks for the question. I would disagree with some of the premise of your question. There is social interaction. It's limited. You said none. So there is some social interaction. And we have come in and over the past 2 years looked at what you're referring to as Mr. Shoats was put on restricted release. And I won't talk specifically about what he did to get on restricted release, but generally people who do things like escape, significant assault on staff, significant assault on other inmates, those are generally the criteria used for restricted release. Since we came in, we looked at the whole process and restructured the process. Inserted now a yearly review that wasn't there before, inserted more programming, inserted more psychology, contacts, and we're looking at the issue of long-term seg inmates. But sometimes what gets lost, and again, I'm not talking about Mr. Shoats in particular, but sometimes what gets lost is many of the people who are on there are people who have assaulted or, in some cases, sexually assaulted other inmates and had a pattern of it. It's rarely one event. It's a pattern of that behavior And then the response is putting someone in segregation. And the question becomes, when's enough enough? And that's really what we're struggling with as a system.
Has 30 years been enough for Russell?
Well, Russell's going through the process, so we'll see.
The past 2 decades he's been going through the process?
3 decades, yeah.
3 decades. Well,
That's what you said, right?
I did say that, but he's been he hasn't broken any prison rules in 20 years, and he hasn't been issued any misconduct. So I'm just wondering if 20 years of
Well, we'll see.
behavior
He's
is
going through the process now. He just went to a new facility, fresh eyes on him, clean slate, so we'll see how it works out.
I hate to change the nature of the questions, but I have a question. I'm a sociologist major here, and I'd like to study different groups and things. And you talked about your friend Buck, who does different research there. How does one go about to get into that rather than go through like the DOC method of becoming a CO if I wanted to do research for the Department of Corrections?
Yeah, we have, there's a management program called PMA. A lot of people get into research in the Department of Corrections through, but I would get on the state website, the Bureau of State Employment. There's 2 types of jobs for the state. There's civil service jobs, which you test for, and then there's non-civil service jobs. We have jobs in both categories. A lot of our community corrections jobs are non-civil service versus a lot of the inside facility jobs are civil service. But depending on the job, I think program analyst is the job title for researchers. And most departments have a research department. State police is another area that has a great research department. But parole is another area that has a great research department.
Hi. I am really interested in the stuff that you were talking about, the focus on income or outcomes. I'm sorry. I know a person in prison named Avis Lee, and I want to give a little bit of background for the rest of the audience. She's currently 30 years into serving a life sentence for being a part of a robbery in which somebody was killed. She didn't pull the trigger. She wasn't even present during, like, when the person was killed, had no planning of that. One of her co-defendants who was there has been released, and she's been an exemplary prisoner. My question is, she recently applied for commutation, and you did not approve of her commutation application. My question is why you didn't approve that, and also why commutation isn't used more, especially since this focus on outcomes. Avis has been a really exemplary prisoner. She's like totally changed her life around. She has done tons of programs, like learned tons of skills, could totally be an asset to her community. And she's taking it, I mean, it's like there's a huge human cost to people like her in her situation, and also a huge fiscal cost of keeping people inside who could get out. So those are my questions.
Yeah, thank you for the questions. And I did not recommend Avis, but I will not put her business on the street as to what specific factors. But it was explained to her, and I actually I do a personal interview with everybody who comes up who's recommended. And there were 3 lifers who were pardoned in late 2010, and while I was on the pardons board, and not only did I vote for all 3, but I talked to them on a regular basis. So some people do get pardoned. I would agree with you that the category in Pennsylvania that probably brings the most questions are folks like Avis, second-degree murder, didn't pull the trigger, and in Pennsylvania they also get life, and life means life in Pennsylvania. So that's a group who the department recommends, but the pardons board process itself requires that all 5 members of the pardons board vote yes for an individual to get recommended to the governor, who then also has to vote yes. And since that change was made in 1997, there's been very few folks pardoned. I can't tell you the exact number, but I can tell you over the past 10 years, it's been the 3 that we voted for. Thank you.
I have a question that about an issue that likely affects a lot of prisoners, but there's one in particular I'm immediately concerned about. His name is Duane Peters. He was part of the Dallas 6, and back in 2010, him and some other prisoners staged a nonviolent protest where they covered their cell windows, and they were protesting the death of another prisoner named Matthew Bullock. He was placed into solitary confinement because he was a suicide risk to himself And the other guards that were in charge of him actually encouraged him to kill himself, in which case he did. So they were protesting that. They were beaten and tased over several hours, and all of the other prisoners were emergency evacuated from Dallas to protect them, except for Duane Peters. He's still in Dallas under the supervision of the same guards who attacked him. He's also a witness in a civil suit against these guards for someone else has filed against them, and yet he's still held under their supervision. They have been retaliating against him. They've tampered with his food. They've served him raw or spoiled meat, or attempted to. They're denying him access to the law library. They're tampering with his mail, and even Deputy Superintendent Mooney himself personally went and threatened him. We've appealed to Superintendent Walsh, who is doing nothing to intervene with his staff's abusive and retaliatory behavior. And my overall question is, well, first I would really like Duane Peters to be transferred for his own safety, because this isn't a direct contradiction. He's in direct danger being kept there, and he really should be transferred for his own safety to protect himself, to be protected from these people. But my overall question is, why are inmates who have lawsuits and grievances against abusive guards being held under the supervision of the same guards or at the same prison where it occurred? And would you ever consider handing over the grievance process to a third party who has no ties to the DOC so that hearings can be more fair and balanced, which would also directly affect creating better outcomes if we have a better system in place in the prison where there is not abuse, which obviously is not going to help rehabilitate anyone.
Yeah, thanks for your question. And again, I'm not going to answer individual inmate, especially since I know nothing about the case. You said 2010, which I wasn't there for. But I will talk generally about abuse in general is an issue in corrections. And one of the first situations we were confronted with as an administration in 2011 was an abuse case that we became aware of through our grievance process. And I would disagree. We have a grievance process that is a sound grievance process, and we became aware of it through the grievance process and pursued charges against several officers, 2 of which were convicted. So anytime you have a situation where people have authority over other people, abuse happens, and it's essential that we have the checks and balances in place to make sure that situation doesn't occur. But when it does occur, our role is to be responsive and respond to it. And as for lawsuits, again, we look at each one individually, and we look at what circumstance makes the most sense for the individual, whether it be stay where they're at or move. Thank you.
98% of grievances are denied. I don't see how that's fair or balanced.
That's an inaccurate number, by the way.
Your focus on outcomes seems very sensible, and I wonder how you, as the Secretary of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, you're able to successfully put in place programs that have the outcomes are supporting you, but you, like you said before, you could be in a group with a group of legislators and they wouldn't agree on the color of your jacket. So how, maybe you could say how you do that, or if you have done that successfully, tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I think that the financial environment where we're really running out of money to do business as usual is what forced us to get to a place where we're looking at research and providing things that are more likely to get a better outcome. Specifically as it relates to program, we do program assessments on all our programs. And it's real important that we don't just offer, for instance, drug and alcohol without seeing if it's being done with fidelity. We're actually sitting in the group, making sure that it's done the way it's supposed to, and we're getting the outcomes we anticipate. So I think the good news is today in our field, the field is going far more towards a research-based approach and really taking a step back. I think parole, our partners at parole, who play a huge role in reentry, are really taking more of an approach where it's more focused on supervision and not, gotcha, we're going to lock you back up, but find a way to work with folks and keep them in the community. Because we know, again, with addiction doesn't just go away. And relapse is part of addiction. Relapse is part of recovery. But the parole agents are asked to balance public safety. So make sure this person doesn't do something while they're out with making good decisions to get the best outcome. And again, when you talk about politics, let a parolee do something. A parolee shoot somebody. And then, you know, just up here at, I guess, Mercer, you had somebody who the parole board paroled, and then the family and the district attorney opposed it, and they ended up changing their sentence. So it's not that we operate in a vacuum, and that's one of the challenging parts about it. We have to balance, you know, trying to move the system in a certain direction with the realities that when something horrible happens, our response to that is we want to lock people up.
We're just gonna take one more question.
I hope that I'm not going to take it away from Judge Zatola or Mark Bergstrom if they're going to ask about this, but you mentioned that you had gone to Europe and studied some of their corrections programs. Which elements of those programs do you think could be implemented in the U.S., and which ones do you think couldn't be, and why?
I think that the sentencing structure is so different, and so is the culture in the community. The culture in the community is a lot less violent than our culture. So that was a significant difference between the two that I'm just not sure we can factor. So some of the responses to crime, for instance, in East Germany, they didn't have life. Right? If you murdered somebody, it didn't matter how egregious it was, 15 years was the most you could do. I don't see there a politician in the world who's going to be the champion of eliminating life sentences. But I think some of the things that really, capturing the environment within the facilities. And we really are starting that with creating these transition units within the walls of the prisons. That we can create the environment where everyone in that environment is focused on getting out. Because right now we have people who are 2 weeks away, 2 months away, 2 years away, and never get out, all in the same environment. So by creating transition units, we're hoping to be able to replicate some of that stuff. We're also exploring the potential, we're early on in exploring this, of mothers keeping their children for a period of time after birth in the facility. Obviously, we require a separate housing unit. We still have a lot of moving parts. In East Germany, it was actually run by a nonprofit, the Red Cross. But that's something that really struck us as a group. I think everybody in the Pennsylvania team was really struck by how positive that was for the child. So those are the Mental Health Act is something else that Pennsylvania's Mental Health Act was last written in 1976, and it's really not sufficient. The fact that we have 21% of our population mentally ill would suggest that the mental health system isn't working. And we're a system that can't hang a no vacancy sign outside. So as a group, we're looking at rewriting the Mental Health Act. So I think that's really the biggest finite step that'll come out of the trip. The mental health, we were at a mental health prison in Holland that was just a great environment. Big investments. They have they have a psychologist for every 4 inmates, I believe. And just that level, I just don't see how we could ever do, but it certainly would be nice. It certainly created the environment where we really had the sense that people were getting well. So the Mental Health Act, the transition units, and early on exploring female inmates keeping their children. Thank you.
Let's give our Secretary